Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Before I introduce Rule 11, here is a quote just for this episode. Something we cannot see protects us from something we do not understand. The thing we cannot see is culture in its intrapsychic or internal manifestation. The thing we do not understand is the chaos that gave rise to culture. When the structure of culture is disrupted, chaos returns. We will do anything to defend ourselves against that return. Over these rules, the ensuing rules, Rule 1 through Rule 11, I've unwittingly um, gone back and forth with if the structure of culture is disrupted, or, which is how it's written in the textbook, to when the structure of culture is disrupted. I even un unknowingly was not mentioning the unwittingly, right? If the structure of culture is disrupted unwittingly, if the structure of culture is disrupted unwittingly, there's something to be said about this if and when is a thought that's arisen from the process of reading to think, writing to develop, listening to hear what's unsaid, speaking to let go through this process of going through Rule 1 up to today, Rule 11. I unknowingly omitted, unwittingly, a handful of times in reading the quote, recognize how powerful and important that word unwittingly is to that quote, or at least my interpretation of that quote of these rules, these 12 more rules for life beyond order. The thesis of maps of meaning, the architecture belief is that the word unwittingly is relevant. Additionally, there's a tension for me between the if the structure of this culture is disrupted versus when the structure of culture is disrupted. It may be that the author would argue that it's both. I don't know. I'll have to ask them, but I think it could be interchanged if or when, because the when there's an inevitability to the structure of culture being disrupted. There is an inevitability to that. Now, maybe it could be argued that we don't know, since we don't know what the future, it's like the fallacy of induction, what the future brings. If the structure of culture is disrupted unwittingly, chaos returns. We will do anything to defend ourselves against that return. When the structure of culture is disrupted unwittingly, chaos returns. We will do anything to defend ourselves against that return. But it's how we defend ourselves against that return that reveals the values of the culture, the core nature of the individual relating to the unknown, relating to forces outside of themselves through themselves, the best of themselves. It's the how of that relationship that reveals oneself. It's the how of that relating that reflects back the culture relative to nature. This quote, I've been saying it again and again and again. Well, it's the opening quote of Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief, a book that has been, according to the author, thought through for many, many years and was rewritten and written, and every word, or presumably every word chosen, particularly based on great thought, more thought than I've put into this series, and much more thought that I've put into the years of reading that book and these books and listening to lectures and listening to books. So I'm going to go with that every word was chosen particularly for a reason. And that's why I'm fixating on this confusion that's happened throughout this series of rules, these if versus when. Something we cannot see protects us from something we do not understand. The thing we cannot see is culture in its intrapsychic or internal manifestation. The thing we do not understand is the chaos that gave rise to culture. We do not understand the unknown. We do not understand the unknowable or the unknowable unknowns, the unknowns that are unknowable. We do not understand, and we may not ever be able to understand, but we have to relate to the unknown regardless of that understanding. We have to, if we're not only going to survive, but if we're going to have meaning. And I think that's one of the arguments being made in Rule 11 and throughout the book, throughout these rules, throughout Maps of Meaning. Rule 11 that we're going to talk about today is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. I've got, if you're listening along to the 12 to Beyond Order, this series and 12 More Rules for Life, I've shared that I read the book multiple times, highlighted segments that stood out. There's lots of highlighting going on. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my book. It's damn near falling apart and almost an entire book of notes in Word. And despite that, I've spent a few hours with Rule 11 in particular, summarizing those notes on Word to these 3 pages. And it's overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed because Rule 11, there's so much to it. It's as if it's a summary or some of in one chapter. Much of Dr. Peterson's theory, maps of meaning, the architecture of belief, where to start. It's absolutely overwhelming. But I guess the first place to start, of course, is with that quote. If the structure of culture is disrupted, right? Or, when inevitably it is disrupted, the structure of culture. The structure of culture. What about the structure of culture has a relationship with the burden on our individuality? What about the structure of our individuality? What if the structure of our individuality has a relationship with the structure of culture? At some point in time in our lives, what if the structure of our personality has a relationship with our aim? What if the structure of our characters has a relationship with how we relate to what occurs as a consequence of the structure of culture being disrupted? If we will do anything anything to defend ourselves against that return. That isn't necessarily good because anything and everything, it may not necessarily be the solution to this disruption, to this fracture of culture, to the breakdown of our society, of our family, of our business, of our lives. It may not be to do anything to defend ourselves. What if that anything is to sell our soul, is to sell out, is to sell ourselves short, is the many different sub personalities or potential gods that we could worship or potential behaviors or impulses acted potentially to be acted out in our nature as a consequence of nature, as a consequence of this disruption of culture, overtakes us and fragments our fragments us and undermines our potential, undermines our destiny, undermines our gift, whatever that gift is that is in each of us that we could potentially live out and act out. If the structure of culture is disrupted, chaos returns. We will do anything to defend ourselves against that return. But we should not do anything to defend ourselves against that return, according to Dr. Peterson's research attempt to figure out what actually is the best idea, what are the best ideas that have been provided throughout the ages by the greats, not just the great geniuses, but the great human beings that have lived, and in particular, Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior, the Son of God sent to show us how we are supposed to relate to that disruption, what to do, what not to do, because it's going to return. If it returns, when it returns, when the structure of culture is disrupted, chaos returns. How we relate to chaos reveals us, reflects the culture, reflects the potential of the culture. Will Horus beat Seth? Will Horus even show up for battle? If you're not familiar with Horus and Seth and Osiris, go listen to Rule 4. Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. But this is Rule 11. Do not let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant like Seth. Seth was the brother of Osiris, the pharaoh, who was a benevolent or wise king who lost his aim, lost his focus. He stopped looking up. And in that absence of responsibility, chaos returned. Unwittingly, the structure of culture was disrupted. Maybe give Osiris the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he just decided to, as an individual, not live up to the responsibilities that authority imposed on him as the king, the pharaoh, the leader of a nation. He unwittingly took a break, stopped sacrificing himself for the people, for the protection of the people, and chaos returned. Maybe Seth became resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. Maybe Seth wanted what Osiris had with it without the sacrifices Osiris had made, and Seth represents the embodiment of that resentment, the embodiment of the contradictions built up in the system for that the system's going to break down and rejuvenate because when there's an inevitability to the structure of culture being disrupted, chaos returns. We will do anything to defend ourselves return from that return, even if it's to adopt Rule 6. Instead of abandoning ideology, we're going to adopt an ideology. We're going to adopt a belief system to maintain psychological homeostasis, to maintain a perception of control, a belief structure necessary to cope with the existential anxiety that comes as being thrown into the world. And we're going to choose to solve to the reality of nature, the reality of our victimhood, our being thrown into nature with an idea that will help us cope with that nature. But maybe the difference between an ideology that helps us cope, that leads to more deceit of omission, commission, lies of omission, holding our tongue, lies of commission, using our tongue to attempt to bend and distort nature, just bend and distort reality, and what that could do to lead to a pride that separates us from reality and separates us from potential. And that's an argument being made in Rule 11 is that potential, the potential future, and what's possible is more real, or and the structure of reality is revealed in the stories. There are stories that tell us what reality is, what is true with a capital T. And if we don't abide by those stories, by integrating our personality, our personhood, our potential for acting out various behaviors and behavioral schemes, then we will be cut off from reality, cut off from potential, cut off from what's possible, cut off from meaning, cut off from our destiny, cut off from the best of who we could be, the best outcome of what could happen in reality, and actually contribute to the destruction of that false reality that thereby disrupts culture, right? Unwittingly, it's not intentional. It's an unintentional, self-righteous arrogance. It's an unintentional self-dilution based on rationalization, based on our convictions. As Nietzsche said, convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. But convictions and lies have a relationship. The story is the thing. The future is even more real. Possibility has a relationship with the future. Rule number 11, do not let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. Resentment is an outcome of not just descriptively being a victim of circumstance, but acting out a story of victimhood. Resentment stews, it bubbles up, it it feeds off of itself, and it's a consequence. It's a natural consequence without an aim, without a plan, in the absence of hope. It's like hope comes from having the goal. Hope comes from having the aim. Hope comes from courageously moving into the unknown and not staying in what's safe where there's protection. You're running out of food. The castle walls are running out of food. If there aren't courageous individuals leaving the castle walls, leaving order and moving into chaos forthrightly, openly, honestly, together, symbiotically, as a unit, because it can't be done alone, then the structure of culture will be disrupted unwittingly. There isn't enough protection around the walled garden. That protection doesn't just come from the walls, the order. It comes from the individuals within those walls how they relate to one another in the face of the unknown. There's in the face of the unknown because the unknown is where future energy needs to come back into the system. The unknown is where the individuals have to venture out into the world. They have to leave the castle to go get the resources, acting out their ability to respond to the unknown, to conflict, which creates this or impels this necessity for a morality, a relationship between them and their conscience, them and how they aim, so that it isn't just about them, it's about them and the team, them and the others, because more than one are going to leave the castle to go get the resources and to bring those resources back to the walled garden, back to the castle, because it can't stay in a vacuum. It'll just become a black hole eventually. If you don't go out and fight, you don't go out and battle, you don't go out into the unknown, it's just going to become super reactive. And that wise king will become that authoritarian tyrant, that it's the pursuit of the treasure. There's a relationship or a relating that's happening between what's who's inside the castle, what resources are there, and what's outside of the castle. You see this in a business. There's like the CEO, the chief executive officer is the chief relationship resources and reasons representative. They're responsible for what happens inside and what happens outside. If there was two circles, they're slightly overlapped, and that CEO position is in the middle, in between these two places, known and unknown. Known, it's like, who is everyone in the organization? What is their role? Why are they there? How can they contribute? And what are they up to? And how are they up to it? And how are they relating to one another? And, are we fulfilling our obligations? Are we taking care of our responsibilities? Are, are our customers served? Are we, what's their experience like? How are our people? Are they served? What's their experience like? What's the future? What do their futures like in relation to the future of the organization that's, outside of the organization? Who could we work with? Who could work here? What resources could we bring to the table? The CEO lives in the known and the unknown. They live with what is currently going on in the organization, what could go on in the organization, both on the positive or like potential side, and then of course on the risk side. What is going on that's going well, what is going on that's not going well, what could occur that would be great, and what could occur that would not be great. Reward risk, living in the present, managing current responsibilities, and living in the future, dreaming up and imagining what's possible. That is a tremendous amount of responsibility in that seat of authority. That is an absolute self-sacrifice, because it's not just about today, it's about tomorrow. And in the absence of the vision, the people will perish. Well, in the absence of, and brings us back to the rule 11 for you and me and everybody as individuals. Do not let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant, because in the absence of vision, you will perish. In the absence of courage, truth, you will perish. In the absence of courage, truth, responsibility. In the absence of courage, truth, humility, responsibility. Courage, truth, humility, and responsibility, you will perish. And resentment feeds or breaks down like a cancer the ability to respond to conflict, because it's going to, resentment and nihilism, whatever, it doesn't matter. What's the purpose? There's no point. Why show up to the battle? Why go out and hunt? Why have the conversation with the spouse, the life partner? Rule 10, plan and work. Why bother plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in the relationship? Why work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens? Rule 7. I'm attracted to the ideology to tear everything down, because at least I'm gonna feel something because I feel nothing. Why? I'm not venturing into the unknown. I didn't do the work, rule one, right? I didn't, as an individual, apprentice to learn the rules, to learn the game, to do my part in the sacrifice, to become prepared to critique it, to be critical of the culture. I'm just going to skip the process of like the sacrifice and the learning and the work and just criticize. Do not carelessly denigrate. I'm just gonna denigrate, not be critical of something I understand. I'm gonna denigrate something I don't understand because I don't understand myself enough, and that the way for me to feel better about myself is to denigrate something I don't understand that I think I understand. I'm suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less I know about something, the more I think I know. I'm self-righteous, I'm self-centered, and I'm self-defeating in this selfish impulse to uh, be attracted to the group thing, be attracted to the anger and resentment for this thing that I fully don't understand. I'm going to carelessly denigrate social institutions and creative achievements, things that have come before me that took centuries to come to fruition, and people that have sacrificed more and done the work. I'm not going to give credit where credit's due because I don't believe in anything. I only believe in myself, and I'm shut off from potential. I'm shut off from, and this is the argument in Rule 11, that reality has a relationship. Reality, the structure of reality has a relationship with the stories that aim up, with the stories of responsibility, with the stories of self-sacrifice, with the stories that are godly in nature. They're these monotheistic stories. I guess that brings us to We Who Wrestle with God, and where Dr. Peterson's leading the blind into the light so they can see past their resentments, past their deceits, past their self-deceptions, past their omissions, past their lies, so that that arrogance can break and humility can take shape and gratitude can be possible because a faithful servant of God, a faithful servant of potential, a faithful servant of conscience, a faithful servant of a belief in something higher and better and bigger than any individual is gonna, it's gonna be extreme. It's going to humble someone and scare the shit out of them away from being lazy, being self-centered, being resentful and nihilistic, being dishonest, being a coward. So the coward omits, the liar distorts reality. The liar changes the facts knowingly. Now, they might change them knowingly, but that's the interesting thing about rationalization. The liar rationalizes. The liar rationalizes. So the lie is reactive in the moment as a consequence to the fear of the unknown and the absence of courage, the absence of personal responsibility, the ability to respond to the unknown and be prepared to actually die, to lose, to fail, to take on voluntary suffering and not win, to actually lose in the short run. You gain the long term. That's the point. You gain your eternal self. You gain potential. You get, even if you die, like quite literally in this reality, in reality you gain what is something more real, which is this meaning, and I guess that's the story of Job that Dr. Peterson talks about all the time, is how he lost and it didn't work out so well, and that's not the point. The point is the willingness to fail, to lose, that sacrifice, being willing to sacrifice And I guess some of the extreme examples of this, by the time there was a society becomes so messed up as a consequence to so many little lies that the lies get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and there just is no honest way to relate to reality through individual conscience. The system becomes so corrupt that not one individual that is not corrupt can actually sustain in the system. The system will inevitably be destroyed. So if the structure of culture is disrupted unwittingly, and that's an interesting chaos returns. We'll do anything to defend ourselves against our return. But we should not just do anything to defend us, because if we do anything, we'll adopt some ideologies, some lies, some stories that represent fictional or disjointed forms of reality that ultimately have a consequence where everything falls apart and we not only die, but we die a slow, painful death psychologically and culturally and spiritually and of course literally. It's or we don't die. We live forever in that in even or what would feel like forever, a life that was painful and boring and perpetuity. There's a meaningless life where there's hard labor, whether it's hard labor and suffering, or there's no labor and pleasures, those two dichotomies. The slave that labors and suffers is one thing. The master that lives in pleasure suffers too. They suffer a different death by a thousand cuts. There is no meaning in that. They're 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 not aiming up, they're spiraling down, and there's that good. If you allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant, you could be the lowliest slave at the pit of hell or the top of the heap tyrant who runs hell. And I guess like that's the adversary in the story. There apparently, there's this in these stories, every story, there's the story of reality. There's a hero and there's an adversary. And in each of our individualities, there's a devil and an angel, or a good and an evil, and a hero, the hero version of us and the adversary version of us. If the adversary is short term, the hero is long term, then there's constantly a battle between our short and our long term, and our short and long term decisions have a consequence for every single other person around us other and people that exist in the world and ourselves, of course, because we exist within time and space. So we exist on a continuum. There's the By the end of this episode, I'm not the same Jay, right? Heraclitus, man never steps in the same river twice. It's not the same man. It's not the same river. There's an engagement between the hero and the adversary. The adversary wants now and what's in the best interest of itself. I'm separating the hero, what's in the future for himself. The identity of the hero has a becomes real in the future because it has a relationship with others, and others, all of us live in our future, in our potential, in what's possible, that is of value, that is creative, that is creating, not what is consumptive. That's not culture, that's nature. Nature is consumptive and culture is creative. And there's a there's a friction, there's a never-ending conflict going on between culture and nature, and that's that chaos and order, that the Taoist symbol that's interwoven with one another, that white and black symbol where there's the white component with some black in it and the black component with some white in it, and the chaos and order. Chaos on one side, order on the other side. And it's flipped. The hero in one story versus its adversary thinks that it is perceived as the adversary to that hero's adversary. And yeah, a hero thinks that their counterpart's an adversary, and that adversary believes they're the hero and their counterpart is the adversary. Everyone is a hero in their own story. That's the point. All of us. And it's when we recognize that we might not be the hero, we could be the adversary. We will be more likely to be open, which is humble, and listen, and more likely to hear our conscience to be able to live in truth, but with our word, our thoughts, and our deeds. That's that Zoroastrian concept. But it's when we rationalize, it's when we unwittingly disrupt it, where we unwittingly are the adversary. This is Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, I think, because to go beyond, and this is Peterson talks about that introduction to Nietzsche in the Peterson Academy about optimized challenge. I think though in Rule 11, do not let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. The resentment and the deceit undermines one's ability to recognize when they're right or wrong. When they're because the that archetypal story, that archetypal conflict, you see this in political spectrum. There's a right and a left, but they exist as a phenomenon naturally as a component of culture to bird and nature. It's flipped. It's not arbitrarily right, wrong, 100%. There's a ratio or some type of where both have components to truth, the truth, and they have to relate to one another for it to ultimately weigh out temporally. And Peterson's making an argument in the Rule 11 that our political persuasions have a relationship with our personality, with which are and our personality is a consequence of our genes and the environment, and that oh, this is where the value of aiming up and the value of personal responsibility and what Peterson is making an argument about faith and morality and God is the mediating principle of that relation of hero adversary. Because if I think I'm the hero and you're the adversary, and you think you're the hero and I'm the adversary, if we don't, well, we're going to be doomed to death and destruction. We're going to be doomed. Neither of us are going to listen to one another if we take that totally like, oh, this is an evil, this is pure evil. Then we're just that violence. But there's there's a way to relate, to cooperate, to cooperate with from a majority sense where there's going to be a minority where it really is evil and there needs to be battle and there needs to be bloodshed. Maybe that's that paradox of tolerance that Karl Popper talked about, the paradox of tolerance. The more tolerant you are to intolerance, intolerance rises up, destroys you in itself. But in Rule 11, our relationship with our resentment has a relationship with, are we living out a story of victimhood? What's your story? What stories are you acting out? What stories are you living by? What stories are guiding you? Are you aiming up? Are you listening to your conscience? Are you telling the truth? Are you holding your tongue too much or too little? How are you listening enough? Are you being honest enough? Are you asking enough questions? Are you empathizing enough? Do you even know what you're doing? Have you done enough work? And that goes to rule one, how's your career? How's your education? How's your relationship? How are your friendships? How's your culture? How is all of that shit relating to who you are as an individual and your ability to take on voluntary suffering and burden chaos to revitalize order, to reintegrate order, to keep, not just keep things in order, but actually innovate what was order that's becoming too rigid, too autocratic. It's no longer the wise king. It's the authoritarian tyrant. Do not let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. And because if you do, then you'll lose your sense of self and you won't actually add value to the culture. You won't add value to the company. You won't add value to your relationship. You won't have value because you'll be meaningless. You will be void of meaning. You will be not nihilistic, meaningless, and useless. Maybe, but that, what story are you acting out? I guess, and that's the argument. Are you, and the hero, the adversary, Cain and Abel, Satan and Christ. And we have to be careful that those that think they're the good person, that's that if the structure of culture is disrupted unwittingly, that self-awareness piece. How can you be self-aware or aware of self without an enemy, without understanding your enemy, without e- empathizing or attempt to, yeah, your enemy? Well, because then you can't even differentiate. Is this evil that I'm dealing with here, or is this a response to components of evil that live within me that I'm acting out that I'm not even recognizing based on my how far I've gone in this game of life, based on what I know, what I don't know. Wait, what I know that what I know. Yeah, there's what it's often said there's what you know, there's what you know you don't know. And there's what you don't know you don't know. But what about what you know that just ain't so? What about what you think you know that just ain't so? What about what you think you know that you don't know? What you think you know that you know, but just not as much as is necessary? That's where others come in. That's where the opposite comes in. The antagonism of the enemy, the adversary. That the adversary helps us because there's an adversary inside of us that we're battling with, and there's an adversary outside that we have to battle to actually temper the adversary in us that we battle with. That's why in Rule 11, Dr. Peterson is talking about how actually overprotection caught like the Oedipal mother, right? The evil queen doesn't want the child to become an adult. The evil queen doesn't want the child to become the boy to become a man or the girl to become a woman because that you lose control over that slave. The master loses control. The evil queen doesn't want agency and potential and truth. It lives off of destruction, resentment, deceit, and failure. And the slave is arrogant, the master is arrogant. They're cut off from potential, they're cut off from reality. That's what they're acting out, a false, justified reality. Do not let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. Instead, have faith. Instead, be grateful, honest, humble, grateful, honest, and humble. That would make sense why Rule 12 would be grateful despite your sufferings. But to be grateful despite your sufferings, you have to imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that. That's the dichotomy of do not carelessly denigrate social institutions, because that would be the victim that's now become nihilistic and deconstructive, feeding off the resentment, bought into the ideology, and they're just tearing it down. Instead, you gotta imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that. That's Rule 2. Go listen to Rule 2 on the Culture Matters podcast, episode 907, I think, because 909 just came out. But you do not hide unwanted things in the fog because if you can't imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that, if you hide unwanted things in the fog, because you won't be able to see. If you hide unwanted things in the fog, you will not be able to see because the fog has a relationship with sight. You can't be honest with yourself. It'll be hard. There's a limit to how honest you can be with others. And that's that arrogance piece. Arrogance is going to be a natural consequence of sins of omission and commission because it's like almost like a self-protection. It's a self cage. It's a self-defense. And I guess the question is how natural is it for human beings to be deceitful and arrogant? That is a part of the nature. That is a constant. It's that it, if we're thrust into this world unbeknownst to us, we're implicitly in an existential anxiety of being with a capital B. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What am I supposed to do? How do I trust? Who do I trust? And the fact of the matter is, nature says, trust no one. You're going to die. You are dead. You're guaranteed to be dead. And it could speed up. So not only is it a 100% chance that you're dead, it can actually be sped up by like everything imaginable. You could die so easily. You are fucked. That is implicit in being a human being that we take for granted without being philosophical, without listening to podcasts like this. Of course, we're going to come up with all sorts of rationalizations for how we're going to burden that anxiety, burden that suffering. Question is, what are we going to do about it? What kind of person is going to go all in on life and just not go with every simple pleasure, knowing full well that they have no idea what the frig this whole thing is? Somebody that's crazy, somebody that's not rational, somebody that is completely thrown away reason, and that would be someone of faith, someone that's going to say, this, I could just make this whole thing about me and just invert into me and be psychopathic and just muck everyone else's life up and be the exact enemy and thing I fear, which would lead me to do that because I don't know what's going to happen. And obviously, I know I'm definitely going to die. And I, there's a likelihood that every choice I make lowers the likelihood of me living longer, increases the likelihood of me dying sooner. So fuck it, I'm gonna throw thing away. I'm just gonna be that scary monster for other people. That's the evil person that said, I don't care. I'm just gonna do it whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. And I'm just gonna take and pillage and just do whatever. That increases the suffering of everybody else. So it's somebody of faith that says, somebody that has a faith in something, in potential, in um, that individual creates a meaning. They are the subject of meaning. They are saying, I could do this thing that's beneficial for me right now because all I have is this moment in this decision temporally because I could die like at any time and then I lost that opportunity to do what I wanted to do and to sin, right? To miss the mark. Or they can aim at something farther ahead that they've made up essentially, but it's meaningful and there's an implicit uh, meaning. There's an implicit value, like moral nature to that for because of the value that it potentially opens up for all of the humans that are living at that exact time within space. So that is the argument for the that's what the person of faith is doing. That they're saying, I'm not going to do this thing that I feel or that I want to do for me. That's like absolutely about me. I'll wait on that and I'll do this other thing for someone else. And maybe that's not even happening so well, so consciously, but it's a component of a society, a species that is living in in through this story. So that's that, right? So okay, that would be the argument that Peterson, for this time in this place, the monotheistic or the Judeo-Christian story creates that type of value, uh, that type of value ladder through the capitalistic system. That's, of course, it's not perfect because nothing is perfect, but what is probably absolute is hell when we don't have the imperfect chaos. So, because that's like guaranteed. If you want to stop chaos, then close down everything and make everybody a slave. And then it'll just be hell. And that actually, from a power standpoint, will have a hierarchy that is fixed and there's no responsibility. It's just embedded in the system. And like that's how the totalitarian regime is gonna work for a period of time before it tears down. Don't be an asshole. Don't let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. So what, and that has a relationship with rule four. Notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. Opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated because nobody wants to work for a tyrant. Nobody wants to live with a tyrant. Nobody who wants to, not even the tyrant wants to work for themselves or be with themselves. That's, Stalin dying alone in his room, his office makes sense. There's an opportunity for Horus to fight Seth, lose his eye, yeah, sacrifice, but to save his father, like Horus is the individual. So this idea here is take on something, go all in on it, live for what's possible, and don't just live for yourself. Live towards the future. Imagine you could be named single-mindedly at that. Do not hide unwanted things in the following. Take on voluntary suffering and face those things and face the past and face those pains and those experiences and those memories and work through them, learn the lessons. Don't live in shame. Don't, because if you live in shame, you're a victim and then you'll be more deceiving. You'll lie to yourself. You'll lie to others. You'll omit. You won't tell the truth. You'll be more likely to lie when is not even necessary. And then you'll just create more and more problems for not only yourself, but the entire world, because the world is subject to lies and can easily be disjointed from potential. And in fact, there's a friction between nature and culture. So nature is the world of lies and culture is the world of truth. And truth through the capital T is about potential and about what could what's possible and about has some type of relationship with this conscience that is this like meta film around human or through human beings that there's this access to this other component of reality that is driving humans towards salvation, something salvageable, something meaningful, something worth participating in, or else we would all just blow our brains out or kill ourselves, find ways to do that in the absence of that participation or be killed in the worst possible manner. But I guess what about, but either way, you're gonna, it doesn't, it's not about what happens here. It's about how you relate to what happens here that reveals who you are and what you're made of and how much meaning you bring to this world. And that's the power of God sending his son to die for everyone's fallibility and just like just low level nature. Maybe the reason Nietzsche said Christianity died on the cross because he was just so pissed that the bar was so low. The bar is so low. You're going to be mini Christ or Christ-like, but if you don't understand the stories and you're not trying, you're missing the whole point and you're just an ideology. It's a bunch of bullshit. Maybe that's why Peterson's obsessed with that, acting it out. That's what makes me think he's a Nietzschean more than anything. Um, it's not about, what do you mean by believe? He's trying to make a point about what matters as far as beliefs. And so, he's likely recruiting a lot of people to look at faith and make a decision on their own without relegating himself to a specific faith. And that could, we'll see what the outcome of that is. I mean, look at me talking about this right now. And I'm just can barely see walking in a dark room with, there's a dim light. That's about as far as I am. Faith. Do not let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. So work as hard as you possibly can, at least one thing, and see what happens. Try and make one room in your home as beautiful as possible. This is like my home. This podcast is a room that people come into, and I try to make it as beautiful as possible by preparing and listening and leaning in. And I was going to say and tell the truth, but I don't do that enough on the show. I don't know how yet. I don't know how to balance the yes with the no, the listening to hear what's unsaid and to speak to let go. I don't know how. If old memories still upset you, write them down carefully and completely. Rule 9. Plan to work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. Rule 10. We're on rule 11. Do not let yourself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. And rule 9 and rule 10 can help us not be resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. And here's how. In looking at the, if old memories still upset you, write them down carefully. Now you have to embrace them. Take what's good, separate the wheat from the chaff, step into, learn from what's bad, step into the future now. Less shame, more awareness, more faith, more courage. You have to have faith to take on voluntary suffering. That everything's going to work out, that it's going to be okay, despite your failings, despite your, despite the pain, the suffering, everything is going to be okay. You have to have faith. There's a faith to being honest. There's a faith to being self-honest and willing to uh, go through more suffering. A partner, rule 10, a life partner will, if it's real, if it's true, if it's honest, now there's a feedback loop of accountability. The responsibility of the individual is being held by account by the counterpart. The counterpart's responsibility is being held to account by the counterpart. There's a value creating relationship where, more unlike just reckless hedonism, where the energy is leaving the individual going out and not coming back with the partnership, the energy is going to the spouse and then going from the spouse back to the individual. It's a circle of value, which is creating more energy, and that sun is getting bigger, that light is getting bigger. With just a single person that's communicating with body and mind and spirit through sexual gratification, uh, and time and space investment, all that energy is going out. It's not coming back to that individual. So they're the that's if they're doing the, especially if they're doing they're acting out sexual behavior ritual, because every time that is happening, it's, well, that is cutting off another possibility for that their counterpart to have a union with someone else. So you could exponentially, you know, there's an exponential deconstructing impact that's disjointing other unions. If someone, so if, let's say you are listening to this and you have sexual relations with 10 people that you do not plan on being in union with, those 10 people all had a counterpart or a potential counterpart. So that's some, I don't, mathematical formula to figure out how much energy was not was lost in the system and not in the absence of those unions, right? So if the union, if a union of two people that are relating to one another and holding each other to account is occurring, and they're responsible on a spectrum, and their ability to relate to their conscience has a relationship with how they relate to one another, that energy is coming back. And imagine, you have like a sun this big, and then all of a sudden it becomes this big. So if it's 10,000 units of energy, now it's 100,000 or it's a million versus it could be just one in the absence of that union. Well, the person that's not in any union and is in a union with 10 others is disrupting the union of those others because the others are either single and they're not gaining that energy. They're just the energy of their own individual self, which is going to have a relationship with how much energy they get from the community in a negative sense. Or they're in a union and now they're lying and deceiving in that union, and that union is not what it appears to be, which is going to corrupt that union and probably make it each of those individuals even smaller because they're in a false union. Now it's like a black hole union. It's inverted. It's going to, and if enough unions in a society are disrupted by living in lies, that's the whole point of if if the structure of culture is disrupted, unwittingly chaos returns. Chaos will return and it will fucking destroy everything and everybody. I have to stop talking. I'm starting to get somewhere, I think, with this rule. It's an overwhelming rule because it takes into account much of what is in Maps of Meaning, How to Plan Your Life, and Peterson University, Personality and Transformation, Peterson Academy, Sermon on the Mount, Peterson Academy, the Maps of Meaning lectures on YouTube, and so much more. But stay tuned for the last rule. Rule 12, be grateful despite your suffering. And look out for the Maps of Meaning lectures that I'm going to do to attempt to not let myself become resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. Share this with a friend that share this with your enemies. Share this with a friend. Remember, a person of knowledge, a man of knowledge must be able to love his enemies and hate his friends. Nietzsche said that. And we will see you next time on the Culture Runners podcast.